The Australian Financial Review.
The global tourism industry has been on a tear. After the pandemic brought travel to a standstill, people made up for lost time, taking more trips and pushing spending to another record last year. In 2025, the number of travellers will increase again, but concerns about crowded cities, the impact of travel on climate change, and in Australia, a troublesome exchange rate, are starting to have an impact on our plans. Welcome to The Fin. I'm Lisa Murray. Today, in the second of a special two-part summer series, we talk to travel editor Fiona Carruthers about the outlook for tourism, why flights are getting cheaper, which airlines are likely to give you the best deal, and why Greenland is suddenly on everyone's list. It's Thursday, January 23. Fiona, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Pleasure.
Many Australians are back behind their desks this week after a summer break, but they say you should always plan your next holiday when you get back from your last. And
Yes.
we are also armed with all of these annual lists about the best places to go. So what are the recommendations for 2025? What's at the top of these lists?
Okay, well, let's start with Melbourne-based Lonely Planet. We all know Lonely Planet. Cameroon leads Lonely Planet's list. This West African country is known for its pristine beaches and dance rhythms. Flipping over to BBC, they say go to Dominica. So just think, white beaches, great food, music, great love of football and sport. The other reason is it's easier than ever to get there. United Airlines will launch direct flights from February out of New York. There's a new Hilton there. BBC also rates the Dolomites in Italy and Greenland. Then over in the US, the acclaimed New York Times 52 places to go this year list, their annual list. They're very popular and they rate Jane Austen's England. Head to Jane Austen's England, dust off Pride and Prejudice. They also like the look of the Galapagos Islands, New York, which has a number of new and refurbished museums opening this year, including the famed Frick Collection on Fifth Avenue, which has been closed since 2020. And Greenland is very high up on their list too. And on it goes. Tourism just grows and grows. It's one of the fastest growing industries in the world. The World Travel and Tourism Council reported that international tourism spending increased by 33%. To hit $1.63 trillion US dollars in 2023. It's now 9% of GDP for the world, of global GDP. It accounts for millions of jobs. And I guess the good news is most countries and regions and cities sort of eventually get a turn.
Mm-hmm. And as Australians, we always talk about the tyranny of distance. We've got further to go. It costs us more money to get there. So where have Australians been travelling recently?
Okay, so for us, it's all about the airfare, where the cheap airfares are going. We're down here at the bottom of the world, and the strength of the dollar. So hence the great love affair with Japan and its weak yen will continue this year. Japan certainly saw the biggest spike of Australian visitors.
I saw somewhere it was 1 million Australians visited Japan last year.
Incredible, I know,
Yeah.
considering I think it's around about 10 million of us go offshore a year, which is also extraordinary. I think all credit to Japan because I don't think I've ever heard anyone come back and say they had a bad time.
Yeah.
And word of mouth counts for so much in every market, particularly Australia, where we're having to spend more than a lot of other global travellers to get anywhere.
And other than Japan, where else are we headed this year?
So another one that's kind of relevant for us that was high on the New York Times list was Koh Samui in Thailand, where, of course, they did the latest series of White Lotus. In the industry, they call it set jetting. Get it? Bit of set jetting could be good. Especially that's attractive to Australians because Thai Airways is upping its capacity into Australia this year. A lot more flights out of Sydney in particular. So that's a nice one.
Did any Australian destinations make the lists?
Yeah, good to see Sydney comes in at 10th for the New York Times list. The opening of the refurbished fish markets and the metro
were the reasons?
The magnets that would make Sydney sticky for travellers. So I love the metro.
Go
I think
the
you do
metro,
too.
yes.
Go the metro. I'd sit on it and pretend I'm in New York.
Yeah.
So. BBC's list, WA was a top 10 destination, also really good to see for that state. And BBC mentioned the very relevant point that Perth is the only destination or landing point for direct flights from the UK or Europe to Australia. Mm-hmm. So you can get on at Heathrow and get off in Australia. So Australians have really discovered it the other way. And I read recently Perth to London is Qantas's most profitable flight.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And I was curious to see Greenland on the lists, given that Donald Trump has put it in the headlines recently.
We need this for national security. We need Greenland very badly. You look at the Russian ships, the China ships, they're all over the place.
I want to make it very clear that in the eyes of the Danish government, Greenland is for the Greenlandic people.
Yeah, maybe get in there before he buys it. They had a new international airport just opened at Nuuk, I think it's pronounced, late last year. Mm-hmm. And they've been working very hard, well ahead of Trump's proclamations of his intentions. They've been working very hard to make the country more accessible by air. So I think they have a couple more airports due to open or certainly being expanded so they can take larger jets can land.
Mm. You mentioned the currency. The Australian dollar has fallen sharply against the US dollar. It's trading near a 5-year low. Is that affecting where Australians are travelling? And what are your suggestions for people not wanting to get whacked by the exchange rate?
Yeah, look, I think it definitely is. The US is very expensive, ditto the UK and particularly the Euro countries. In terms of countries where you can drive your Aussie dollar further in Europe, I had a great trip to Bulgaria last year, recommended by Tony Wheeler, the co-founder with his wife Maureen of Lonely Planet, to see ancient Plovdiv, which is a gorgeous city. And it's on the Bulgarian leave. So it will likely adopt the euro later this year or next. But I found Bulgaria cheaper and a great place to visit. For Europe, destinations to think about, definitely Istanbul, Turkey, of course the Turkish lira, a little bit cheaper. I had a couple of days in Montenegro last year as part of a cruise and that felt very reasonably priced, a lot of fun. It wasn't peak season, but it certainly wasn't crowded. So, the age-old tips, go shoulder or off-season. I mean, you also get into the museums a lot easier. Opt for smaller local kind of guest houses, little boutique hotels. Also, that sort of flying into second, third-tier airports, lesser-known cities, you'll probably get more bang for your buck. Certainly then there's the lesser-trod destinations like Estonia, Slovakia, Slovenia. They're all kind of on these lists right up the top, sort of top 20. Slovenia, of course, they're getting very used to seeing Australians around because that's where Harvey Norman has its European headquarters.
There you go. Pick up a fridge while you're there.
And bring home a fridge. So that's how you can make the Australian dollar go further, Lisa. But I think for Australian travellers, the really good news is that the price of flights will most likely come down this year.
Fiona, we're talking about travel, where people are going and how much it's going to cost them. You've just said that the price of flights will probably go down this year. Why?
Look, most of the good money, including industry veterans like Graham Turner, co-founder of Flight Centre, and Webjet's CEO Katrina Barry, are saying flights will come down. There's more capacity coming on, particularly things like Chinese airlines are coming back strongly. Interestingly, Webjet crunched some data for the Financial Review of the big six, what we sort of dubbed the big six long-haul carriers. So these are the airlines that have the greatest capacity out of Australia. Something like 70% of Australians who are going long-haul, particularly to London or Europe, will fly on one of these carriers.
So that's Qantas, Emirates.
3 Middle Eastern carriers.
Qatar.
Yes. One more.
Etihad.
Yes.
Cathay.
Yes.
Singapore Airlines. Done.
6 out of 6.
So most people travel on those airlines?
Most of us are going to travel on those airlines. So Webjet crunched some data for the financial review of airfares for the first 3 quarters of 2024 through till about October. And I always think London is the cheapest city to fly into because, they have so many flights, so many carriers go there. But in actual fact, when Webjet did an average of the big 6 carriers return airfare in economy class out of Australia into London, the average price was $3,145. Mm-hmm. So that takes in your peak season, of course. Whereas the average fare to Rome and Paris during the same time frame was just over 2,900 for both cities. So not a huge saving, but something, Followed by Athens on 2,722.
So look at where you fly into.
Look at where you fly into, but then, of course, be mindful of costs at the other end. I was also in Athens last year. Boy, has Athens got expensive, I thought. Okay. But, of course, these cost of living pressures, they don't seem to affect whether people travel. Webjet also found the number of flights booked to Europe was up more than 70%.
Okay, that's a lot.
On their site, and up to London by more than 140%. So it hasn't slowed us down. Strong growth is still predicted this year, including Australians up to Europe and the Northern Hemisphere. The other thing that will put downward pressure on prices is the range of new flight paths and increased scheduling from a lot of the big players. So Turkish Airlines launched their new Istanbul to Sydney route via Kuala Lumpur. You've got Etihad will really ramp up its capacity this year, which is quite exciting, the carrier that goes through Abu Dhabi. They've been sort of missing in action since COVID, so it's great to see they're reclaiming this route. Of course, the big story remains the Qatar Airways tie-up with Virgin Australia.
Qatar Airways has announced it'll buy a 25% stake in Virgin Australia.
So doing this means we can use Qatar's aircraft, their people who are well-trained, and reuse our commercial strength in Australia.
So once they clear their final regulatory approval hurdles, which everyone tips they will, from June we could see 28 flights a week into Doha from Melbourne, Sydney, Perth and Brisbane, conducted by Virgin Australia under what's known as a wet lease agreement with Qatar, whereby they will lease these Qatar planes and crew. So, of course, more flights usually means cheaper prices. Qatar and Virgin will most likely come in with cracking deals, and that's going to put a lot of downward price pressure on all other carriers, including the big 6.
So generally, with the Virgin and Qatar tie-up and with smaller airlines providing more competition, the cost of flights is likely to come down. But which airlines are typically the cheapest?
Well, before we get on to sort of what I loosely call the challengers, the smaller airlines that are really nibbling away at market share, I guess don't rule out the big 6. They tie in with a lot of Australians' frequent flyer points. Interestingly, of the Webjet data I talked about before, they actually found Etihad averaged the cheapest return fare to Europe last year, even though they didn't have their usual kind of capacity of flights, while the most expensive was Qatar Airways, followed by Qantas. So look, of the increasing number of challenges to the big 6, the Chinese airlines were definitely the cheapest on Webjet's site at 1,850. That was an average return in economy to Europe. So we've got around 8 Chinese airlines flying in now. I hear China Southern is generally considered the best. Quite a few sort of tourism industry people fly their business class and say it's fine, it's good, definitely cheaper. Junyao, a Chinese airline out of Shanghai, they just started flying into Sydney in December. Just remember, of course, the Chinese airlines still fly over Russian airspace. So for some people, that's just an automatic no way. Safety and other concerns rule it out immediately. And I also hear the beds are on the very firm side on the Chinese carriers. You have Scoot, the low-cost arm of Singapore Airlines, putting on incredible prices. Scoot Plus, seats don't go flat, but that little bit roomier, they're leather, nice enough product. They're doing incredible prices. I think I saw something like $810 from Australia to Athens recently. It was part of a deal, but that's pretty incredible price. That's one way. Now, in terms of the United States, you have Qantas and the three big American airlines, United, Delta and American, all flying that route. So that's helping keep downward price pressure on the Pacific route. But my hot tip is, and many people are looking to Air New Zealand, that direct flight Auckland to New York, they do, taking on Qantas on that leg. And also Fiji Airways. Boy, they punch so far above their weight. They're a great little airline. They have a lovely business class product. And who doesn't want, a layover in Nandi?
So let's talk about business class, because for those of us who turn right when we get onto the plane, are there deals where you can get a reasonably priced business class or first class fare? How do you game the system to try and lie flat on your way to Europe?
To navigate it. Okay, can I shamelessly spruik my magazine, High Flyer, AFR High Flyer, which comes out on February 28th. There's the second edition of this magazine, which I created just to help people answer that question, to understand what's the biggest seat in the sky, what's the longest seat if you're tall, all that stuff. So that is a great resource, and it compares the big six, all their seat specifications. But my short answer is Turkish, again, out of Sydney or Melbourne. Their tickets are cheaper at the front of the plane. Just no, when I search, it seems to me much cheaper to do Turkish metal all the way. So don't take a Turkish Qantas code share if price point's your key driver. Turkish metal the whole way is the way to go. And of course, they're hoping to have the aircraft delivery to do the Australian East Coast to Istanbul direct by 2026 or 27. We've mentioned the Chinese airlines above, of course. They will go into the key European cities like Frankfurt and Paris, and they have loads of code share options. And, of course, London. Another one I'm hearing a lot of buzz about is China Airlines out of Taipei. Particularly, again, I'm always interested in what the travel industry leaders fly when they're paying. They're not travelling for work. And they rate it very highly. I've heard a few people have very good things to say about China Airlines. Ditto the two big Japanese carriers, JAL and ANA. They are getting so much airplay at the moment. People just love them. Korean Air and Vietnam Airlines, another two getting a lot of oxygen at the moment. Korean gets huge accolades for its food, ditto Vietnam. And the latter flies to London, Paris, Frankfurt and Munich via Hanoi or Ho Chi Minh. So I think it's really interesting. Hanoi is a small airport, so a lot easier to navigate, a lot more relaxed. Another of my tip is don't be a snob. If you want to fly flat, think about if price is important, Vietjet, another interesting little outfit out of Vietnam. They do flatbeds on some of their aircraft, not all of their aircraft, so be careful when you're booking. Minimalist, lie flat product, minimalist business class, but hey, you'll lie flat. So pack your PJs, bring a few cushions. The bed might be on the firm side, but you get that sort of shut-eye, which is what everyone
stretch out
is chasing. And then, Lisa, I made you and myself feel a lot better. We were joking before this podcast. If you can't lie flat, if you're on a journalist wage and your salary doesn't stretch that far, you can sit up and think of the trees, because a feel-good aspect of economy now is better for the environment, because the economy cabin takes up less space. It's a much smaller footprint in the sky, and economy passengers have a smaller luggage allowance than business and first class passengers. And, more weight means you have to burn more fuel.
That is an interesting point. Are the climate conscious among us starting to travel less overseas, or think more carefully about their travel and where they go and how they plan it? What is the outlook for both domestic and international tourism this year?
A lot of travellers are definitely increasingly anxious and troubled. You only have to see the wildfires everywhere from Greece to Canada, Australia, LA. It's troubling and people get caught up in it. It's very visible, and travel contributes to it, of course. You've got all the airlines exploring sustainable aviation fuel, but that's still in its very, very early stages. I think most of us are beginning to question what we're doing and what the end result is. But of course, who doesn't want to travel? If you have the luxury of being on a salary that affords you the ability to travel, who doesn't want to discover new cultures and expand their horizons and get out and explore the world? So I think looking at all the figures that are coming out from Australian passenger movements to the World Tourism Council, the growth will pull back this year. It will just ease off a little bit. But 2025 is shaping up as a really interesting year. There's going to be more flight options back on the table for Australians, greater capacity, hopefully cheaper prices. That's where it's all heading. But there's no doubt the catch-22 is that travel is hard. If you worry about the environment, it requires a lot more thought, more planning, more research to see where you can leave that lighter footprint.
Thanks, Fiona.
Pleasure, Lisa. Happy travel.
Happy travels. Thank you for listening to The Fin. I'm Lisa Murray, with Fiona Carruthers reporting today. High Flyer magazine will be inside the Financial Review on February 28. The Fin is produced by Alex Gow and Lapfan. Fiona Buffini is the executive producer. Our theme is by Alex Gow. If you like the show and want to hear more, follow us wherever you get your podcasts and consider rating and reviewing us as it helps others find us. For more stories about markets, business and power, subscribe to the Financial Review at afr.com/subscribe. That's the end of our summer series. The Fin is back to normal next week. See you then.
The Australian Financial Review.